Well, good morning, everybody. It's a delight to be here. My name's John Tomsett. I'm head teacher at Huntington School in York. I've got 15 minutes to talk to you about research schools, as we are one of the first research schools in the country, the research schools that Justin Greening, the Secretary of State, was talking about just now. So in the holiday over Christmas, I made my own, those spoof Ladybird books. I made my own one about education. And Rob Coe's in the room. And so I thought I'd begin with this slide, because I hope none of you out there are still working in schools where they put judgments on your lesson observations, because there is no evidence to it at all. Right? Challenge people. Rob Coe will prove to you that people only have a 50% chance of getting a judgment right. But anyway, who cares about evidence? This man does. I was with this man yesterday, Sir Kevin Collins, the CEO of the EEF, and we were talking up in Glasgow. I was talking at Parkhead at the Celtic Stadium to 400 teachers. It was their first day back after a very short half-term that they have up in Scotland. And we were talking in a city, in an area of a city where the life expectancy for men is 54. Right, so Kevin was reflecting that he'd have already be dead, and I'd have 2 years to go. But it is a place where getting it wrong matters, because if you get it wrong, then people suffer. And you end up perpetuating the deprivation and the disadvantage in that community. And we work, all of us, no matter how leafy a suburb you work in, all of us will have children in our schools who come from similar deprived backgrounds. And it really matters. So this is what Kevin says all the time. That's really, think about what he's saying there. If you're not using evidence, you must be using prejudice, because you're prejudging what might or might not work. And it was really interesting to listen to him. And we live in a world, don't we, where it's really easy for policymakers to dismiss the evidence. I thought what the Secretary of State said was really heartening about having research schools and evidence at the heart of the future of the school system. But when it comes to grammar schools, it's easy to ignore it. Right? So let's have a look at the evidence completely. Because if you ignore evidence, and we live in a world of alternative facts, you have that 8 years without any controversy, really, the old email server, and you end up with that doesn't need any words, right? Because all that is policy based on ignorance. I mean, if you watched Newsnight last night, it was almost embarrassing, because the presenters didn't know what to say about Trump's take on Israel anymore, because I don't think Trump really understood a word he was talking about. But that's where you are if you use prejudice and you don't use evidence. So, 7 reasons to use R&D in education. I think they're pretty straightforward. First of all, it stops you doing things that don't work. Stops SLT putting Ofsted judgments on lessons ridiculously. Stops people using VAC. I hope nobody's using VAC. There's no evidence base to it at all. Stops people using different coloured hats for thinking. Someone's made a lot of money out of that, I tell you. And you've been spending it. Terrible. It also gives you more time, because you don't have to waste your time doing stuff that doesn't work. And if you get a really good systematic approach to using evidence in your school, and you appoint a research lead who's got you give them the time and space to support using evidence, saves you time. And we all know about the money, don't we? I go back to 2010. I outed myself in the TS a couple of weeks ago. I wrote an article last March, almost a year ago now, about the budget, and it was the front page of the TS, 7-page long article about how we'd cut £770,000 off the budget at Huntington. and I had to write it anonymously a year ago, but I outed myself a couple of weeks ago, and it kind of went viral again. If our budget had just kept up with inflation since 2010, we'd have another £800,000 in the budget, just if we kept up with inflation. So there's not a penny to waste. She may have gone to Shanghai, right? But so did a primary school head I know, who's got no money like none of us, like any of us have. And that woman came back off the back of one visit to Shanghai and spent 25 grand on the Shanghai maths program. Now, it might work in Shanghai. Does it work in Poppleton in York? Probably not. Right? Everything works somewhere, nothing works everywhere. So you have to be really judicious about the money you spend. I think one of the things that bringing evidence to bear upon what we do in education does do that. It does increase our professionalism. It does help us see the signal and get rid of the noise. And amongst the noise, it helps us see what really matters. I'm obsessing at the moment because I got an email as I came down from York this morning from my deputy saying we got a brand new modern languages block. A student yesterday tried to superglue the main door, the lock on the main door, so we couldn't get in. Right, so I'm obsessing about that. But probably what really matters is the quality of the marking in the school. Right, we'll sort out the lock, but the noise at the moment around the school is who's supergluing locks together. But actually, what's most important is actually getting underneath who's doing the marking properly. I do think it's good to model hard thinking. At the moment, I'm thinking really hard also about a restructure of the business and ICT departments, right? Because ICT is now morphing into computing. And we're thinking really hard about it, taking lots of evidence. It's good to model that in front of students and colleagues. And finally, when you have really good practice that is evidence-based, it allows you to shine the bright spots on what's happening really well in your school. I got into evidence-based practice and looking at it 5 years ago when I became an assistant director of the Ebor Teaching School Alliance up in York. And the part of the big six of teaching schools is research and development. I think it's the poor relative. It's the one that gets least attention. I think it's the one that should get most. How can you run ITT programs if they're not evidence-based? If you don't know if it works? Some ITT programs are still teaching VAC. And it crucifies me that's the case. All right? So I think it's the most important one. So we went along and heard this man. I always think Ben Goldacre. I always think he looks like Mr. Darcy, don't you? He's quite a dashing chap. But he was asked by Michael Gove to write this document, which is Building Evidence into Education. They launched it back in March 2013. And that's a really important document. And off the back of that, the main message of that from Goldacre was that, not that we just hang on to RCTs, not that we just go with the evidence, but we bring experience and evidence together, right? It's about the two things combined. And with the help of Tom Bennett, off the back of that, I think in April 2013, off the back of a single tweet, he formed ResearchEd, and we are now where we are. We've become one of the first 5 research schools. It's a combination of funding from the EF and from the Institute for Effective Education, which is based at the University of York. We've been really privileged to be involved in that as the kind of prototype for the research schools that Justin Greening was talking about. We've based a lot of our work, nearly all our work, on the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. I hope everybody has been able to access that. I hope you know what that is. Metacognitive skills and feedback, the two most important kind of interventions you can make, which are probably the cheapest, best researched, and have 8 months in a year extra progress for students. Right? You can go on my website. I taught a lesson on Monday. I taught a writing lesson to 130 Year 11s in the hall, how to write deliberately. And I showed them through my talking and my writing, my metacognitive processes that are going on when I do that. And the full video of the lesson is on my website. Have a look at that. It's really good stuff, and it really works. I don't do any of this because I think it's kind of flavour of the month. I do this because I think it impacts on student outcomes. So this is what we do. Big events like this, disseminating ideas about evidence-based practice to hundreds of schools. We work with about 50 schools in the Yorkshire and Humberside to make sure that they kind of develop research leads who can inform policy in their schools. And then lastly, we're working closely with a small number of schools on projects, the kind of thing where you might think, I'd really like to find out if paying parents to come to parents' evening is worth it. Right? You may laugh, but getting that the last 10%, the most hard to reach parents, you might as well just spend money on it. It might work. It might be cost effective in terms of outcomes, rather than spending money, people putting money on a whole load of other things. Be interesting to find out, wouldn't it? So there it is, schematically, graphically. We're there in the heart of that, the research school, and that's the kind of range of our reach. It's really, I think we got chosen not because of me, because of a man called Alex Quigley, right? I would urge you to follow him. He's called @HuntingEnglish on Twitter. He runs a brilliant website. He's probably, and Rob may disagree with me totally, but one of the foremost teachers who understands what evidence-informed and evidence-based practice means. He's now head of our research school. He's one of those, if you're a head teacher in the room, he's one of those people you just let fly, because if you try and fetter him in any way, he'll go off somewhere else. So Alex, he just does what he wants, essentially. And doing this kind of stuff is all about school to school, I think. We found that out when we talked to HEIs about it. You know, it's hard to get people to take it on, to look at the research and actually think about the evidence. Applying it and working hard to apply it in a classroom takes time and energy. And people like Alex are the experts at how you do that. I think that's completely true, you know. And in my school, in micro, people listen to me because I teach. I run 1,500 school, 112 teachers, etc., but I make sure I teach. I do my stuff. After half term, I'm taking naughty boys from each side of a year 11 for extra English, so I get my hands properly dirty. And it takes a lot of time to make sure you can apply it in the classroom. So the network is there. That's the 5 schools. So there's 6 more are being appointed as we speak, which will take us up to 11. And that's how much is there in terms of investment to make that research school network work. And then since those 11, Justin Greening said this morning, it's the other 12. So we'll have a research schools network in the end of 23 schools that will span the country. And I think it's got real legs, this. I think it's not something that's just going to go away. You could hear how she came back to evidence all the time. In the now redundant, obsolete excellence, education excellence everywhere white paper, it was mentioned over 100 times, the word evidence. And on micro, you have me and Alex at the centre in a school which mirrors the kind of research school network. You have research leads in your school who are really interested in it. I'm growing 2 or 3 Alexes, like Dolly the sheep. And then you get your subject leaders understanding how to do it. And then, in the end, in a school, you have 100% of the practices going on, which is evidence-informed or evidence-based. That's what Rob Coe says. He's probably got the same slide coming up in a minute, so I'm really sorry. But that's really, it's not, you know, I think the challenge for us, I was talking the other day at Leeds University, and I was walking from the keynote that I just delivered to a session I was doing with a woman called Fran. She's 26, single mum, got a 4-year-old. And she said to me, life's really hard, I teach full time. Right? We're a mile away from creating an evidence-informed profession. Right? For Fran, if we can get a side of A4 which summarizes a piece of research, right? That's the first thing. You've got to get a research lead to do that first for you. Because giving her the full PDF is a waste of time. She hasn't got time to read it. If she reads the side of A4 and thinks, oh, I might try something different today, and I'm going to try and do it for the next 6 months, and I'm going to think I've got a control group and a treatment group, and I'm thinking about process evaluation, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to evaluate it in the end, I'm going to do a pre-test and a post-test, and she gives it 6 months and she absolutely sticks at it, if she did that, she'd be in the kind of the tiniest percentage of practitioners in the country, because that's a really hard thing to do. And then at the end of that, if she found out it didn't work and her students' results got worse, not better, would she dump it? She'd put all that effort in. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. Right? We can't see that it doesn't work because I've put so much effort in. So we make it up that it does work. Right? So we're a mile away from getting to that model, but I do think we can do it. I really like that quote from Thomas Sowell. He was saying it ironically about Obama, but it applies to us. You know, I said yesterday to those teachers in Glasgow, we cannot afford to get this wrong. We cannot afford to keep guessing at what might work, because there are people out there that do know what works, and to use their knowledge and their experience and their wisdom is really important, because if we can get it right, we get it right for those kids from the deprived families where it matters most. And that's what Ben Goldacre said in 2013. He took the long view back then, 4 years ago. That's what we've got to do. We've got to start now and build for the long term. One of the greatest things that Michael Gove did was set up the Education Endowment Foundation. 125 million over 15 years to create an evidence-informed profession. It went across cross-party thing, completely separate, funded the EF, and now you've got Kevin Collins yesterday telling me that there's a teaching and learning toolkit. One was launched in Scotland yesterday. I don't know. I try to work out why you needed a different teaching and learning toolkit in Scotland compared to England, whether kids' brains were different in Scotland. Probably not. It's probably a more enlightened place, maybe. But there's also South America. There's a teaching and learning toolkit that they're producing, and it's going global, based on stuff in the end that began with Rob Coe and the Sutton Trust up in Durham 5 years ago with Steve Higgins. But it's taking the long term. And for me, when I filled in my membership last night, I thought, I cannot come along, Alison, without being a member, because it was a members only do this. So I was amazed at how many other organisations there were that if I'd been a member of just one of them, I'd have got a tenner off. But I wasn't. But all the networks, all those things. And I just think maybe that the research network can be the glue that holds the whole thing together and makes sure that we don't waste another penny on what we spend. Thank you very much.